Hey guys, welcome to the Disruptors, the show where we get the folks that are quite literally transforming the way we think about today, tomorrow, and much, much more. Today we've got definitely, I think, one of them, Gerd Leonard, on the program. Thanks for coming today, Gerd.
You're welcome.
So I was excited to have you on because you've got a really interesting perspective on the future. And I wanted to kick things off. You've got a quote that I liked a lot. And this is a bit of a bastardization of it, but it's something to the effect of tech is not what we seek, but how we seek it. And I think that's deep. Can you unpack it?
Yeah, it's a German philosopher quite some time ago. He talked about technology, basically saying that technology is not what we're seeking to get, but how we seek to get what we want. So, in other words, what we want, of course, human happiness, contentment, standard sort of human purpose. That's a difficult question, but technology will not make us happy in parentheses. It will provide hedonism and excitement, and it'll provide lots of interesting stuff, but it will not. As I say, we will not find happiness in the cloud or on the screen or with an AI because that's a human process. So technology can be helpful with that, but it can't really create it.
I got you. One sec. I'm just gonna pause this part for a sec. It's a little bit echoey by you. I don't know if there's anything you can put near the microphone, like a t-shirt or a blanket or something.
I can. I have baffles and stuff too. That will take me a minute to set up. Let me try the other microphone here. Okay.
Okay. No worries. Sounds good.
Hang on just 1 second. Just put the other mic on here. All right, let's try that again. Here, just a sec. I have a different mic now.
Okay, that sounds pretty good.
Just a second. Let me adjust the microphone here because I do have settings. Microphone 85370. That's usually sounds a little bit better. I can get closer. Is that better?
There we go. That's better.
Okay, good.
Perfect. Yeah, sorry about that. I know some people are snobby about the quality. I want to make sure people stay on because I know you've got a ton to add.
Yeah, I do a lot of these too, so it's a good idea to watch the quality. That's for sure.
Okay, I'm just going to take that last question from the top again, and we'll restart. Sound good?
Okay.
So you've got a quote that I like, and it's something to the effect of "Tech's not what we seek, but how we seek it." And I wanted you to unpack that.
Yeah, so over the years, I've been looking quite a bit at the philosophy of technology and what it does for us, and I've come to the conclusion that a famous German philosopher once said 50 years ago or so that technology is not what we seek, but how we seek. And I've been using that as a variation by saying, we will not find happiness in the cloud or in an AI or in an assistant or even on the screen. What we find there is a kind of a happiness, hedonism in a way, which is a sort of low-level happiness. We find good things there, but happiness is a human relationship. It's what makes us work. As relationship experiences is not the technical process of sharing a photo or calling somebody. It is a little bit deeper than that.
How do we get back to that? Because I think we've gone a ways away from that with current technology, especially Facebook, etc.
Yeah, I think in many ways you could safely say that technology has become its own purpose. So the tool has become the sense. So imagine if you're a carpenter, the hammer becomes the goal of your life, not the house, but the hammer. That's kind of what Facebook has done. Facebook has made itself indispensable and has become essentially a sort of an echo chamber of itself, an AI that takes our data and just leads us around in circles. And I think this is the thing that's happening when technology becomes too powerful, is that we forget who we are. We think that the tech itself is more important than what we originally tried to do with the tech.
Does technology become too powerful or humanity becomes too weak?
Well, of course, a little bit of both, but I think, we're naturally looking for shortcuts. We're looking for easy ways, we're looking for convenience. But in many ways, you can safely say now that technology has become so good and so fast and so cheap that it's kind of like convenience over consciousness. Not to say that's always really a bad thing, but when you do it in the extreme, then you sort of abdicate from decision making. Like, if you use Google Maps, you abdicate using other maps or just finding your own way. That's not a big deal. But if you do that with 50 things in your life, like Tinder, and you abdicate your own decision making and your own tools. If you do that with 50 things, and if you do it with 1,000 things in 10 years, then I think we'll be in trouble.
When does that become the Matrix?
I think that, I tend to not want to get too close to the science fiction stories. I find them exciting, but they usually are more fearful. And I don't think we should go into the future based on fear, like Ex Machina, Black Mirror, that sort of thing. It's entertaining, but the reality is really that the biggest issue today is not all of that stuff, is that we become too much like the tech ourselves. So we get lazy, we go for convenience, we forget how to do things, we stop taking care of our bodies. We basically just let go of all the things that make us human because it seems like an easy way out, like a good shortcut.
I mean, evolution's all about shortcuts. Is the problem that we're in an era now where we've evolved beyond, and technology's evolved beyond what we're evolutionarily capable or evolutionarily designed to handle?
Well, I think the biggest step right now is that we're moving towards a world where we can augment ourselves. We can, as Ray Kurzweil says, transcend humanity, or transcend our limitations, which is more likely. And that becomes extremely dangerous because then we're essentially reprogramming ourselves. So not just the way that we think or that we use a smartphone or virtual reality or whatever you want. We're actually going to be different as a species. And I think at that point, I would say, if I can't get out of bed in the morning without connecting to the neural network on the internet in some way, then I'm in deep trouble. And I don't think that's the right direction for us to take. I think it'll be technically feasible, but morally probably indefensible.
Won't it also be a slippery slope, though? Those are the kind of things where a little builds on a little, builds on a little. We give up our privacy. We suddenly have these phones in our pockets. Then we let these phones have notifications, and then suddenly we're plugging earbuds in. Is there a? I understand on a personal level, I think individuals are able to resist, but the collective seems to have that slippery slope, that gravity that almost feels inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this with many things. This is not new. I mean, we're doing this with drugs and alcohol and cigarettes and social contracts. We have social contracts, we have regulation, we have enforcement, we have police, we have all kinds of things that make sure that we do certain things not too much. For example, here in Switzerland, Germany, most kids can buy alcohol. Even if you're 12 or 13 years old, you can buy alcohol, not legally, but it's easy, right? So that doesn't mean kids will start drinking brandy at 5 in the morning or before they go to school. So it's basically, there's many reasons why things work or why they don't work. And some of them work on things like moratoriums or non-proliferation treaties like nuclear. And we will need to find a stepwise approach that says you can do this, but if you do that, then you've taken it too far. And that's kind of what we do with many things. So it's like obesity, right? Same thing. I call this sometimes digital obesity. You can eat as much as you want. It's not forbidden. And hence, we have many sick people who are, seriously obese. Now, you can consume the internet in the same way and become what I call digitally obese. Yeah, that's not forbidden. But nevertheless, we should have precautions against people doing those things and helping them to find a way out and set a public standard that says that obesity is not normal. It's a problem. It's a serious problem.
Do you think it's dangerous when 29% body fat's okay and 31% is obese? We kind of have that cutoff line with this completely arbitrary.
Yeah, that may be in this case, but we're talking about body issues here. That's really quite different than digital issues, because what we have here is first and foremost industries around the world, the top 20 digital companies in the world that are literally making hundreds of trillions of dollars of money. So the problem here isn't health. The problem is irresistible temptation.
But it's that cutoff line. So what is internet addiction? Is it 4 hours a day? Is it 6? Is it half an hour a day? It's kind of the same question. It's just a different metaphor.
Yes, absolutely. But the cutoff line, I think the CEO of Apple, Tim Cook, said it pretty well. These are tools. When you get hooked on them, we will warn you, and we will have a new app that warns you, and then you can still decide. But many people have already resorted to their kids not using those devices for some time, and I think we need to think about not a black or white approach, but an approach of like we do with drugs, with many drugs, including, of course, California, right? Legalizing drugs to a large degree. We have to find a way to balance the good with the bad, because too much of a good thing is a very bad thing. And that's something that's a constant human quest. I mean, this is not new. It's just bigger.
It is definitely bigger. I know you've talked in the past before about the Jurassic Park of big tech and what's coming. And I want to jump a little bit into that in terms of what you're most excited about, what you're worried about, and where you see us headed.
Well, I'm very excited about technology in general. I think we're approaching a period of the next 10, maybe 20 years where we can solve really vast global problems using technology like water, food, all the implications, diseases, energy. We can switch to renewable energy, despite of what happened in North America right now. We're switching to renewable energy. So there's many, many things that we can deal with now using technology, but we have to have the political will to share the benefits of this. And we have to also find a way of saying that we'll deal with what's called the externalities, the outside effects of technology. For example, the externality of Facebook is loneliness in users, it's manipulation, it's all of those things, and they have to be dealt with rather than saying, well, we don't use social media. So, this is like the oil industry has to now put up with the externalities, which is pollution. And we have to address all these things, or we have to change our behavior. I think this is what I'm excited about this process. It doesn't mean that it's in principle good or bad. It's just the governance and the way that we deal with these new powers. That will take a lot more time and efforts and money to clear away so that we have a good future.
There's really two different ways for dealing with the governance. Three different ways. You have China's more communist centralized control approach. You have something more akin to the US or other potentially European countries where you have some type of elected minority leaders, et cetera, and groups. And then you have Switzerland's direct democracy approach. What do you see for the future of politics and how people can control, regulate, and change it?
Yeah, so of course, this is a vast question, but basically there's two things happening here. First, politicians should all basically pass a test for the future. They should all know about what's coming, the stuff that we talk about, the stuff that everybody talks about, except for the politicians, cloud computing, quantum computing, genetic engineering. They should pass a test on this so that they can become future-proof and kind of aware of these things, which they currently are not. And in order for politics to work, it needs to be professionalized. For example, what we have here in Switzerland is many politicians aren't professionals. And that works fine when you're dealing with the local media law or something like that. But when you're going to decide on human engineering of the genome, that's a different discussion. So I have suggested many times also in my book, Technology versus Humanity, that we should have a digital ethics council, like the ancient Greek had a council of the wise people. And they weren't CEOs, so to speak, right? And they weren't just politicians. They were experts on these issues. And there were wise people like Aristotle, or like Stephen Hawking was, or people who would be able to discuss these things. So we need professionals dealing with this. Direct democracy, in my eyes, is flawed to deal with this because of the speed.
Yeah, Switzerland does everything well, but it goes up at the rate of like a bank. You're growing at the interest rate, so nothing terrible happens, but a lot of times you miss out on things early. That was my experience living there. But how do we handle that? You want professional politicians, and yet I'd argue professional politicians, it kind of encourages corruption and scumbags. Who wants to get into politics professionally, except for the ones who want to be politicians?
Well, I wouldn't say that necessarily professional politicians. I want professional people dealing with those issues on a level that transcends industry and science, but also goes into philosophy and ethics, because I think that's where we're going to be deciding the future. We cannot leave that. I mean, right now, the story of the future is being written by the tech companies. And many of them are clients that book me for my speaking gigs. So I have that firsthand experience. The people who tell the story about the future are not the countries. They're not the philosophers. except for maybe Noel Harari or so. But there are IBM and Microsoft and Google and Facebook and Tencent, and we should not leave the story of the future up to companies who stand to make trillions of dollars selling their products if that future happens.
Are you worried about tech monopolies and tech companies becoming more powerful and possibly controlling the world more than governments?
That's already kind of the case. I'm not necessarily worried because they're evil. I'm worried because they're so good and they are so fast, and everything else is behind. Our ethics are behind, our governments are behind. In Europe, we can't agree on anything, how to do anything together, and that will take a lot more time and money. So I always say that we should spend at least the same amount of money on humanity than we spend on technology. And I think in that way, we would have better information and better discourse on these issues. And we shouldn't leave the future up to the ones who are going to write the code for quantum computing.
How do we do that, though? Because politicians have the power, and to give the power to someone else. So once you have the power, you don't really want to hand the reins away.
Yeah, I believe that's difficult, of course. But, if you're talking, in Europe, we have a pretty good system that, by and large, most European citizens are humanists. So we believe in a collective benefit. We believe in distributing the benefit, which is taxes. We believe that we should respect each other. And of course, there are many discussions about this, but the US system is extreme capitalism. That's basically what it is, corporate profit. And that will not work here because corporate profit will sink the ship. If it's just about that, it's another 20 years and we're toast.
No.
Right? Because basically we're going to sell out humanity. That's the whole plot. And this doesn't even have to be by design. It just kind of happens because that's free-ranging capitalism. And in China, it's the same thing, but it's the state running it. So we're sort of stuck between those two extremes in Europe.
I would say the US has the shortest term perspective, China has the longest term, and Europe is somewhere in the middle. That would be kind of my read on the situation. I think the amount of control that you have is directly proportional to the distance out you're able to think.
That's true, but here in Europe, we have a lot of great researchers who usually end up working in the US or in China because of their skills of robotics and data science and so on. But our story is that we're always going to be more careful with technology to make sure it can be controlled, that the benefits are distributed. While in the US, when you have a new technology, you go at it at full speed, no matter what the side effects are, because it's exciting. And of course, it makes money, changing the world and so on. And in China, it's the state that does everything. So it's kind of like, that's a scary proposition if we're going to be in an arms race of artificial intelligence and human genome engineering, and of course geoengineering as well. Right? That would not be a good situation. So this is why I'm saying we need to have a United States of Europe to answer together on these issues.
They're definitely more level-headed. What would you give for the odds in the next 50 years of the technology and forward speeding industries of the US and China leading to either some type of large-scale war or the breakup of one of those two countries?
Well, I'm much more an optimist on this. I think what we're seeing now is a lot of hype about technology like AI that is over-promising but not really there yet. What's the last time you spoke to a robot that sounded like a person? That is hyped everywhere, but it's not really there. And so we're going to take longer. There's a lot of fear there, a lot of Hollywood stuff, and I think on the topic of China, if China wants to be a global power, and they do want to be that, obviously, they will have to adapt on a global level in terms of our ethics and policies and basic principles, which they currently are drifting towards in some sort of strange way. But basically, given a huge amount of exponential change in 25 years or so, we'll probably end up with a sort of global government not of a legal sort, but of a factual sort, right? Because these issues are not issues that we're going to solve by ourselves. They will require global collaboration. If we don't do that, it's going to look pretty dark, because we're talking about things that we have to solve together, like we did nuclear energy or nuclear power. And, it's working, and the same thing has to be done for all the other issues like AI and genetic engineering, and that's kind of inevitable.
It is inevitable. It's a lot of these are games, and the question is whether or not it's a finite or an infinite game. And that comes down to how the game gets played. Capitalism, a lot of times, is a finite game, which can lead to a lot of the problems we have.
Well, I mean, we had a very limited game so far in that capitalism as we know it is basically based on profit and growth and GDP and all that stuff, which is, very straightforward definition of happiness is to do well, right? But, that will not work in the future because now we're starting to sell ourselves. I mean, we are becoming the product, as we can clearly see with Facebook. And that is the product of AI, or so that's us. Right? And so what we need to do is to say, let's expand to what we used to call people, planet, profit. The idea of saying that it has to do good on all three of those things. And that discussion is going on in many different levels, starting with Apple and Unilever and, of course, Patagonia and what have you. And that's kind of where everything is going. And I think in 20 years, we're going to get there.
I think Apple's doing it tongue-in-cheek. They're doing it to rub junk on everybody else. I don't think that's really what they believe. Just based off of the products they released and how they run their business.
Let's put it this way: it's the least of the worst.
That's a good way of putting it. Who's the best of the best when it comes to countries? Who's doing a good job?
Well, I mean, okay, that's also a difficult question because it depends how you measure it. But if we're looking at what's happening in Scandinavia, clearly Finland is doing a great job with that. Estonia is a digital country. Denmark has really struggled with immigration, but on the other hand has a really powerful justice system. Switzerland is an island of peace, and some people would argue that's probably a little bit boring because of that too. But I mean, there's all kinds of examples of this. I think in the end it really comes down to creating a system to where we go beyond this idea of just more jobs, more money, more GDP. I mean, JF Kennedy already said that in the 1960s that GDP is the wrong measurement. And it's just, if we pursue that now with all the other stuff that we're doing, that's going to be pretty dim.
Oh, absolutely, because everyone has to drive like 100 cars because that's what drives GDP, right? So in terms of the future, you said it's more unknowable than ever. And I'm curious what you mean by that. I would agree as well in terms of the exponential tech layering on itself.
Well, if you're looking at, science fiction is becoming science fact. Basically, every day there's a major breakthrough in something or the other. Whether it's CRISPR-Cas9 or battery technology, or the next mobile network, or whatever, and it's mind-boggling. So now we're at the point where it's not just exponential, but also combinatorial, which means combining different sciences. So convergence, for example, of technology and biology and biotech means that basically medical care and healthcare is becoming a tech business. And these things are all happening at the same time. So we have quantum computing, we have AI, we have virtual reality, we have big data, we have cloud computing, and we have language recognition, all at the same time. And so that basically means that while we have to be skeptical on some of it, but the amount of progress we're seeing is like, I mean, I can't tell you often enough how I turn around and say, well, I didn't know this actually is working. This actually is doable. And so I think it's safe to look at the next 5, 7, 10 years, obvious things, what we call the hard futures, the definitive future, like the end of oil and those kind of things. We can look at that and sort of feel it coming, observe it. But 50 years? I mean, in the 1950s, if you were Arthur C. Clarke, you can talk about the internet. And he did. And that was doable. But today, 50 years, that's like anything, right? Anything could happen. So 10 years is what I, generally look at.
Are we crossing over the event horizon in terms of what is knowable and just the explosive amount of future possibilities?
Well, it depends on what you do. I'm not like the Jimi Hendrix of futurism that Alvin Toffler was, or I'm not a scientist. My job is really to observe rather than to predict. So I don't see myself as a predictor. I observe the things that most people don't take the time to observe. And so therefore I get a good feel, like I wrote in my first book, The Future of Music, that music is becoming like water, which we got from David Bowie. But, 10 years later, we have Spotify. And that was completely obvious to us, but, maybe not to others. And that's kind of what I do. I observe, and then I sort of feel my way forward. And that's really kind of what my approach is.
And that's a major problem with GDP as a driver or as the measurement of success and happiness, because as information becomes free and we start having less stuff, what exactly are we charging for?
Well, Peter Diamandis said that in his great book Abundance. There's many other funny parts in the book, but this part is good. Basically, things are becoming abundant, right? First, music and media, television, books, reading, driving, transportation, Uber, Airbnb, and then very soon banking, insurance, energy, becoming abundant. And when things become abundant, then the whole capitalist idea of consumption is eventually dying. Because, we can afford to pay everyone just to live because it's basically free.
That would just terribly go against my ethics if everyone was happy. So you've got a book out, Technology versus Humanity: The Coming Clash Between Man and Machine. Where do you see us headed on that front?
Yeah, it's a provocative title. It should have been, the publisher convinced me to make it.
You're Swiss and hate it, don't you? You want it to be much more conservative.
Well, actually, I'm German, so I'm both German and Swiss. But so I have two souls, and even a third soul, which is my half American soul, when I used to live there. But basically, I'm convinced that we're looking at humanity on top of technology. In many ways, it's entirely doable. The only thing that we need to do is to agree on what that means. And to agree on the rules of the game, which are dramatically changing. It's not that technology is bad, it's good, but it's morally neutral. It doesn't have any judgment. So if technology can turn us into paperclips, it would. Because there's no question about ethical values here. If we want technology to be exponential and ethical, we're going to have to build the frameworks, and very few people are looking at this, apart from actually building this stuff, is to put the other stuff in place that makes it ethical.
How do we do that if we're not willing to say that in the Middle East, having a religion that allows you to torture women and do all kinds of terrible things because they're women? How are we able to come up with something collective about technology if we can't even agree on basic human truths like that?
Yeah, well, that's really kind of apples and oranges. But it's a basic decision, for example, on the bottom line of the decisions. For example, should you have weapons that automatically kill people without human supervision? 99.98% of the world would agree, except for the ones making it, the US and the UK. So we can find those basic things. Like we have agreed on the nuclear weapons that we were not going to allow every country to produce their own weapons. That would have been the end of it. And so we've run a tight ship on this, and it's been difficult, but it has worked. And so I think we should agree that an artificial general intelligence, a machine with an IQ of 1 million, should not be created that mirrors a human in terms of consciousness or sentience. That would be extremely dangerous. And we should nevertheless use what I call IA, intelligent assistance, to further business and get things done. But there has to be a compliance on some of the basic things. And this is beyond, it's not about religion or beliefs. It's just very basic stuff that we can delineate what that means.
But how do we do that in a winner-take-all scenario? So if we're racing for our lives and we're both in cars, neither of us are hitting the brakes. We're going as fast as we can. We're willing to do anything. In a lot of ways, AGI is like that, because if you are the first company, the first government, the first terrorist group to achieve this, you can kind of win all games simultaneously.
Yeah, but that was the same with the nuclear weapon. We did have 2 bombs. Let's not forget how we got to that insight is by using it. And that's a bad example. But afterwards we basically said, okay, let's watch out here for a second. There's a bunch of countries who have this, but if we go further with this and it's going to be used by everyone, we're just gonna, that's it, right? And I think if we do the same thing here and saying, okay, if China is going to develop a man-made weapon, a combination of AI and genetic engineering, and of course all the military all over the place is working on this, right? There has to be a way of having a global supervision of how far we go, or if we go there at all, because it's an issue that applies to every single one of us. It's not an issue that is good for your own power. It's not like you're going to build more submarines or something, So, and I think that is what we're dealing with right now. It requires global collaboration, like geoengineering, changing the weather. You're going to change the weather to have more rain. Well, it does happen to impact everybody else's weather. So these are survival, existential issues that are basically on the horizon.
It does, but if you think about it from the terms of let's create an AGI that can win at the stock market and win at the bonds market and win at all of that. I mean, that's most likely where something like this would be created. It would be the financial markets trying to do something to make lots of money because they don't necessarily have to feel the consequences normally.
Yeah, but let's not forget, we do have a lot of controls and supervision in place, especially in the financial market, because if the entire stock market was run by an AI or by a machine, it would be utterly useless for anyone, because an efficient machine would actually not create that much money. It would only do it for the first 2 weeks, because after that it would be automated, which would mean that nobody would have prediction on anything. It would just be a machine. And so there's many reasons why that wouldn't be a good idea and why that wouldn't work. But I grant you that we may need to have an incident like we had with Hiroshima or Fukushima, right? Where we thought about nuclear power. We may need that as an incident to say, you know what, this is not a good idea if everybody just does what they want here.
I think we might need that as well.
And I shudder to think what that would be. Like a global, disaster of the airline traffic with an AI or a machine basically downing, 10,000 planes or so, that sort of thing. But that really sounds like dystopia now. So I'm hoping that we can avoid that. But you may be right with the argument. I don't know. I'm hoping not.
I mean, you could just crash the stock market as well. We saw what happened with the housing crisis. How do you think, you've talked a little bit before about mega shifts, and I know this is something that you think a lot about.
Yeah, this comes out of my work with many companies who talk about digital transformation, and I'm starting to hate the word now. It's kind of like a cookie cutter approach. We have to transform, and then everything will be fine. But so they talk about digitization, but then actually what's happening, and I've come up with 10 different things, and I actually have a free excerpt of the book online at megashifts.com that's available in 10 languages for downloading that chapter. The megashifts are actually 10 different ones. So digitization, of course, virtualization, cognification, which is to make things smart, what Kevin Kelly talks about a lot, robotization, augmentation, and a few other. We used to laugh when they call them the Asians because they're all Indonesian. But so there are 10 of those, and when you take them all together, this is what you have to understand is how the future is going to change, because all of those things are happening at the same time. So things are becoming smart. That's cognification. Things are going virtual, like music, films, television. That's virtualization. When you put them all together, you're starting to see where things are going, both in good and in bad terms. Of course, can be seen from both different ways.
How do you think about the future when there are so many individuals? You've brought up quite a few of them so far. Futurists focused on the future and trying to forecast it, predict it. How do you not be a Me Too futurist? How do you think differently in a world where everyone thinks they're thinking differently?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to explain. I mean, I didn't become a futurist because I knew what a futurist was. I kind of fell into it doing internet startup stuff and digital music. And I realized very early that I was good at seeing the totally obvious. And I was good at explaining that to my investors, what was going to happen. And it actually did happen because it was obvious. But I wasn't really good at realizing the business plan behind it. And I usually was 10 years too early. So there's a talent there. Well, I had like 10 different startups. One was called licensemusic.com, and the other one was called Sonific. And there were components of Spotify in there and Getty Images on the licensing side. And it's a long story, but it wasn't wrong. It was just too early. And then I realized when I wrote my first book called The Future of Music in 2005, when I wrote the first book, I realized that I was quite good at seeing that coming and describing it, and that turned into a skill. And to explain hard things was also a skill that I learned. So I'm unusual as a futurist. I don't really care about the word futurist in general. I think many people use it as a marketing tag. And, I'm not into trends. I don't get excited about tech just because it's tech. Well, I've been doing this a long time, so I have graduated into what I call now maybe more of a nowist, as Joey Ito says, or I'm also a humanist, so I'm not just about all the techie stuff. I'm trying to balance it.
Which is incredibly important because there's a lot of tech idealists out there that kind of just praise everything technology and aren't really able to see the consequences.
Well, I think these days it's quite clear that in the next 10 years, we're moving very quickly to a world where basically anything is possible. 10 years for the computers to have unlimited computing power, 10 years. 2050, the singularity. So in my lifetime, I'll probably get to see this unlimited power, unlimited possibility. And when we all become as God, so to speak, parenthesis, right? When we all have unlimited power, then the question will be, what do we want to be? And we have to decide that now. We have to think about what we actually are looking for rather than, what is possible, because anything will be possible.
And this kind of ties back to that quote initially. Tech isn't what we seek, but how we seek it. So in terms of timing, I'm glad that you brought that up. So my background, building businesses, a little bit of investing as well. And with investing, with business, timing is everything. It's the difference between 1,000x return and going to zero. If your timing's wrong, you hit nothing. If your timing's right, maybe you're the next Uber. How do you think about timing? I know you said you've gotten it wrong a few times, you've gotten it right a few times. How do you know when now is the right time?
Well, I think that's usually a question of experience. Of course, I wasn't experienced enough to see that back then because I was more confident I could change people's opinion quickly. When I got into digital music, it was basically just the record label cartels, and it wasn't anyone else. I couldn't convince him to do anything because no matter what I said, they just weren't ready. And when Spotify came along, and Daniel Ek figured out how to get them to come along. Well, it was painful, I'm sure, but they did come along. And so this is about experience. It's about, not seeing yourself at the center of the earth, which you tend to do when you're younger. And that is, of course, an extra skill. But generally speaking, timing is the result of observing better. So the companies I work with now, they get the advantage of me having looked at, a couple hundred parallel cases. And so I can say, okay, this may not work in India, but it would work in Germany or in this industry. And then, it's always a question of how you make the cultural match, because many people are confusing technology and culture. They're saying, well, technology works, so we're just going to do this. But, all success is based on culture, company culture, national culture, business culture, social context, stock markets, right? It's about culture. And if you don't understand culture, you won't be successful.
And if you don't understand culture, you can't create incredible technology. What technology outside of what we've talked about do you think will be the most transformational 20 years from now?
Well, of course, they all hang together. I think the most obvious one right now is voice recognition, natural language processing, and image recognition. And we're at the point to where that's almost perfect. So in the very near future, we're going to speak to machines, they're going to speak to us, and they're going to become like pals and friends and people, basically. When you combine that with cognitive computing, the machine can speak, it can watch, it can analyze, it has a unlimited amount of computing power. It can become very real in terms of searching, doing stuff for me. So in less than 5 years, we'll be sitting at the table and just saying, hey, give me the projection of the following business case, use the parameters from this book, and use the 100 million data feeds, and 12 seconds later, I have a response. Right?
Does that scare you at all? It's not only there to help you, it's there to watch.
Yes, well, it can obviously do both. Like all technologies are powerful. They have dual-use technology, so they can be used for good and bad. When you take the Internet of Things, it's tremendously powerful by connecting everything, so you can track and you can look at stuff and you can figure out better results and be more efficient. At the same time, it can create a giant panopticon, which would be really terrible in the hands of the wrong people, including the wrong countries, the wrong states, the wrong tyrants, so to speak. Right? Just like social media in the hands of other tyrants in certain countries has turned into a prosecution tool. So I think the ultimate answer with this is, the change is coming, the possibilities exist. Now we need collaboration, we need supervision, and we also need some sort of process that says, we're doing this because it's good for us, and we're not doing this because it will not be good for us as a collective.
Does Europe have to start that? Does Europe have to start this because the US is kind of just throwing away anything related?
I have high hopes for the US to do this, but it will not be, of course, with the current government. I have high hopes for India doing those things, and for Indonesia. But first and foremost, I think this is what Europe is made to do. We're made to have to stop looking at the past or the present, but to take the values that we have and project them into the future. And if anybody can craft a good story about the future, it should be us. I mean, the Renaissance, right? Everything that we've done in Europe, we have huge history about that here. We just don't have the guts, and we don't have enough big countries. So we need to come together and create that. And I think that's where my next sort of book project goes, in this direction of the United States of Europe. Which sounds like an ironic satire now, but that's kind of where I'm heading with this, because I think we have a great position to do that.
So you said you don't think Europeans have the guts?
Well, generally speaking, we are in Germany. We are producers. We like to make things perfect. So if they're not perfect, we won't do it. In Switzerland, we want to avoid all the risks. So if it involves risk, we're not going to do it. In Italy, we're mostly about fun and food. And if it doesn't involve our Italian national heritage, we're not interested. So every country has their own little specialty. And generally speaking, we're too saturated. We're too comfortable. We're not looking to reinvent, and that is changing now in Berlin. It's changing here in Lausanne. It's changing in so many places. And I really think that a bit of the American attitude of the sky is the limit would be a very good thing to have here. But in America, it's the total opposite, which is like the sky is the limit and everything else can go, and you can die and nobody will pay any attention.
Speaking of the sky's the limit, how do you think about this new space race shaping up?
Yeah, I'm not that hot on the space stuff. I think it's inevitable that we do this because, like I said, quantum computing, we're probably going to end up sending an AI out to space to do that for us. So yeah, I think it's interesting, but the space tourism stuff, I think I could care less. Exploring other spaces, that's coming, but clearly it won't be us. It'll be the machines who do that for us, by and large.
I think the tourism is just the means to an end. You got to sell the expensive phones before you can make the mass market stuff. It's just hitting scale.
Yeah, it could be, but again, I think we have more urgent things to solve than that. So I'm not that interested in it. But I think, hey, who am I to say that this is not a good idea? It probably is, but I just haven't tuned into that very much.
What are the three biggest problems you think humanity faces right now?
I think three biggest problems is that we are obsessed with an ancient model of economy, pretty much everywhere in different variations. So we're pursuing this idea of profit and growth, and that's killing us. So we need to invent what some people have deemed, post-capitalism, sustainable capitalism, the Star Trek economy, whatever you want to call it. That's a big issue, because without incentive on that side, it just isn't going to move. You can do as many good things as you want, but the stock market will keep asking Facebook to make more money, and that's why it's turned into an AI. End of story. Right? So Zuckerberg can't change Facebook without changing the economic model of the stock market, and that won't happen. So that's it, right? Can't do anything.
What do you think about Elon wanting to take Tesla private? Now, he didn't make it and got sued out the wazoo for it. But what do you think about companies potentially doing that so they do have that control?
I think that's probably not a bad idea. I like what Elon is doing, and I like his work, and he's obviously kind of a genius in many ways. I don't really look at the markets at this way. I think that in order to have a functioning stock market, we have to go back to the original idea, which is to believe in a company and that it can make money, that it can do good, that it can do the right thing, that it can be a good entity, or as I think a philosopher once said, a person of good character. And this is where we go back to when we think about people, planet, profit, or people, planet, prosperity, as I say. And that is basically the direction that we have to go in. And I see that discussion popping up. So that's the first point. The second point, I think the really big challenges for us in that regard, that for the next 20 years, we're looking at eating what we have sown as far as climate change is concerned. The next 20 years will be absolutely horrifying on that topic. In 20 years, we can probably go backwards. We can probably solve it. We can probably have unlimited energy, but the next 20 years, we're going to have to put up with what we have created.
You think 20? I've heard much longer time horizons. It's basically when you're driving a car, even after you take off the gas, you keep coasting for quite a while.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of scientific discussion around this, but in the next 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to switch 100% to renewable energy. that's kind of, that doesn't mean that the old stuff is going to go away. Obviously, the CO2 is still there, and the ppms will be 500 or something. But at the same time, we will not add anymore because it will be not economically viable. And we're going to invent things like CO2, the cleaning up process, right? So these things are already cooking that we can actually get CO2 out of the atmosphere. I'm quite confident on that. But for the next 20 years, the results of what we have created will cost a lot of money, and will cost, well, of course, will also create new jobs, I suppose. So that's my second really big concern. The third one is that we weaponize what we are inventing, primarily artificial intelligence and genetic engineering and geoengineering, so that we inadvertently or advertently or just by accident, like Facebook has become a challenge to democracy by accident, in parentheses, that we do these things and they have the disastrous output.
I think I'm much more worried about the inadvertent causes. I think there are definitely players that would want to create weapons or negative impacts from some of the technologies. But I think the quote is very prescient. Man's reach exceeds his grasp.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I think the way that we've always learned how to do that is by realizing the implications and also having examples, and so we're actually more reactive than proactive. In some cases, I think that can be learned. So I do have hope for this, but I think the only way forward is going to be a new form of economy and a quasi-global council of the wise people, or government, if you want, a sort of global government of a sort, that deals with the very large issues we're facing. And I think this will be a very, very long process. And this kind of idea of everybody doing their own and guarding their own turf is going to be absolutely ludicrous in 10 years. Basically,
a UN that's not powerless.
Well, we didn't really have the reason to do all of those things until now, because the tech wasn't there and the challenge wasn't as big. AI has been looked at for 50 years, never actually worked, and now it's quite clear it is essentially doable to create such a machine in the next decade or so. Countries are looking at weaponizing it, so that's clear that we have to have a will to act on this.
I'm very skeptical about modern approaches towards trying to create artificial general intelligence. My background is engineering, and there's one quote that kind of always comes up, and it's KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And it's almost always that the simplest solutions are the most elegant and complex. And I feel like we have a very complicated solution that we're trying to shove more and more power into.
Yeah, that could be, but I mean, there are many fractions of AI, and if you're looking at the subheaders, machine learning and deep learning, then you can see that with deep learning, that is really where all of the momentum is coming from. And that's actually a pretty old science in many ways. But now that we're going to lose restrictions, like we will have live data from anything, pretty much anything. And systems need the data that we didn't have until now. We're going to connect everything, the Internet of Things, and then we're going to have a quantum computer, and then we'll have unlimited energy to run the computers. So, I mean, no matter how you look at it, all of the stuff that used to hold us back is going to fall by the wayside.
And just to clarify, guys, we're not saying Skynet is coming. We're just saying the future is increasingly more unknowable than ever.
Well, I don't think, again, we should not start from the basis of fear, because that's primarily based on fiction, entertainment, Hollywood scenarios. I think that many components of what we're looking at, they're not coming together yet. They're not out of control. They can be abused. They can be used as a weapon, but it's not like we're sitting here right now and saying, okay, we've got the equivalent of a nuclear bomb here next week. We don't have the Oppenheimer moment yet. And I think we have time to coordinate this when we see it coming, including the impact on work and employment that we definitely need to look at. And there's only one way forward, which is to say that we embrace technology, we don't become it. And that's also a big header in my book. This idea of saying that we can't do really much else than to embrace technology to a certain level, but not to the level of becoming technology.
What scares me about that Oppenheimer moment is, I remember there was an interview or something with someone on the team. I don't remember the details very well, But essentially, the day before the technology was completed, they asked him if they ever thought it would be doable, and he said he probably didn't think it would be doable. A day later, it was done. And that's something that is less exponential than this. I think technology progresses despite what we think.
Yeah, there are quite a few differences from the nuclear bomb scenario to AI. Of course, you need plutonium to make a bomb, and that's a lot more work than writing code. So it's pretty hard to make a bomb. It's probably a lot easier to program something that would be quite evil. But I think the fact is that with collaboration, I think we can make this work in a positive way and minimize the negative benefits. It may have to be after there's an incident because of the implied logic to act on. I mean, Oppenheimer only worked on the nuclear bomb because he didn't want the Germans to have it first. That was his entire argument. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't have cared that much, right? And of course, he didn't expect the government would actually use it. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of lessons to learn from history here.
Definitely. Do you think humanity will merge with AI or robotics in the foreseeable future?
I think the answer on that is I think we probably can. Technically speaking, 50 years. Technical terms, we can connect our neocortex to the internet. We probably can. It will take a lot longer than we think to actually make it work without killing people, but I think it's doable. The question is, do we want that? And should we? And my answer is that, again, I think we should not do that. I think we should keep a strong line between our existence and the existence of technology. If we're going to have machines that will explore the cosmos for us, then by all means, let's send the machines. I don't think we should become half a machine so that we can do that better. I think we should keep the difference.
I think there's one flaw with your question. I don't think it's, do we want that? I think the question is, does someone want that? And does someone with enough resources want that? That's why I think it's nearly impossible to stop, because a lot of that stuff, you just need the resources.
Well, but we did have that issue in the past. We did have people with lots of resources, and they did not succeed in doing only what they wanted to do. I mean, we have these issues on a daily basis, whether it's Ebola or virus or viral warfare or chemical weapons or all that. We have lots of bad actors who want to do this.
But this wouldn't be a bad actor. This would be, let's say, I don't know. You can use the example for essentially biotech, for genetic engineering. We can play the same example out and say, okay, genetic engineering, we know this is unethical because it'll create yada yada problems, so it's banned worldwide. That's all good and well, but if I find out tomorrow that my kid has cancer, I don't care what any of the laws are. I'll go to any one black market that's necessary to.
Yeah, but that's actually, that would be completely wrong to do that, because what we want is we want to use the benefit of technology, for example, in figuring out how to cure or prevent, more prevent than cure, really. But to prevent cancer, we can probably learn that, and we can develop technologies, which of course we should also do together. And then the same technology can be used to do other aberrations with it, right? Like we always do. And so what we need to do is we need to get the benefits and make sure that we can keep that in a system to where we don't have this completely rampant development of negative use, like super soldiers. Right? And this is also a question of social contracts. For example, you could say, well, I have a propensity for diabetes. I'm going to change that gene so I will never get diabetes. And that's probably doable. And then on the other hand, you could say, I'm going to have kids and they'll be twins. And now I can program them to be incredibly intelligent just by making this small incision. Yeah? Well, so to speak, right? And so the question really is, what is right or wrong, and what should be okay, and what should be so okay, or what should be a response in the case of a disease rather than in the case of a design issue? Those are totally different cases. So I'm with you on this. If we can save a single person from cancer by getting genetic engineering going, I'm all for it. I just don't want that same tool to be used to create a breed of super soldiers. So.
I would agree. My argument was more the tool will be created and used. The question is just what it's used for, and if it's above the table or below the table.
Yeah, but the controlling the tool is the key issue. And if it's controllable, I don't know. We may eventually end up at the place to where machines control the tools because we've not been able to control the machines that do. Because you can only imagine a machine with an IQ of a million would have figured out every possible way that you could unplug it from power. It would have already, mapped out the next 1,000 years of your efforts to disconnect you, and so we wouldn't have much of a chance there. But I think this is something where, in principle, we should have a moratorium on artificial and general intelligence, not on AI by itself, but on the application and the actual use of it.
I think it would be beneficial to do both. But I think the big takeaway from this entire conversation is we need to have more conversations about where we're headed and the ethical issues that potentially face us.
Absolutely. I think this conversation has to be number one, and it has to be public. And I think every politician, every mayor, every public official needs to know about what's coming and why it's coming and why it's good to know about it. And we have to decide together rather than, people just going forward because they are the biggest tech companies with the biggest pockets in the world.
Amen. If you guys agree with this, make sure you share around the podcast. Gerd did a great job. Disruptors.fm. Share it around, especially if you know any politicians. We've all seen what happened when congressmen talked to Zuckerberg. They don't really know what's happening whatsoever. We need to have these conversations, guys.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thanks for coming. And before you go, Gerd, where is the best place for people to find you and learn more about the books?
Well, I think if you type my name, Gerd, on Google, you'll find the gastrointestinal reflux disease first, but I'm right after that. So it's GerdTube is my YouTube channel. So GerdTube.com. I have like 500 hours of video there. My book is at techversushuman.com, techvshuman.com. But again, if you just Google my name, Gerd, and then technology humanity, you'll find everything you want, including free downloads, and much of my stuff is available online.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun. I really wish we could have caught up when I was in Switzerland, but maybe next time.
We will do that.
Yep. Cheers, guys. If you guys enjoyed this, you know what to do. And until next time, go make it happen, I guess. Peace.